Last talk of the day, welcome. My name is Stephan Janssen, and for the people who don't know me, I'm guilty of founding Devoxx 20 years ago. That's my fault. And I try to focus on the Belgium edition, so that's what I organize as a part-time job. And all the other events, I just go as a tourist and make sure that I can enjoy and not run like a headless chicken from one fire to the other and just go to sessions, right? And so that's also the reason why I want to talk about how I've actually used ChatGPT, GPT, and large language models, not only ChatGPT, which you will see later on, and now how am I trying to use it for the Devoxx Call for Papers app, so the CFP app that we use to get talks. I actually did this talk in France, at Devoxx France, a couple of weeks ago. That's probably the advantage of being related to Devoxx, is that my talks often get selected if I submit, so I try to limit myself to submit not too many. And the talk I did in France, I speak French, but not fluently enough to do a presentation, so I actually wrote an application in Python where it was transcribing what I was saying in real time and then showing the translated version in English, or my English was translated to French, and then it was shown as transcripts on the slide. Luckily here, I can just keep on speaking in English, and hopefully everybody will understand English. But that application is actually, I open sourced it, which I'll show you the link later on. So this is the agenda, and just as a heads up, all the images that you'll be seeing are generated by Midjourney, right? And I try to give it a bit of a twist to have more the English class, or how would you say, the royalties, but in different poses. So what I want to give is a quick overview, then a bit of the use cases, how I've actually used it, and then some code examples and conclusions. So that's basically the high level. So this is actually a very interesting slide from Dr. Alan Thompson. He actually gave a keynote last year at Devoxx Belgium. He flew all the way from Australia, and he actually gave a really nice overview of all the large language models. Now, this is already almost 2 months old. And that's a long time in AI worlds these days, because every day there are new models being released. It's unbelievable. I am trying to keep up on a daily basis, and it's even not possible. You need multiple people to actually stay up to date. And what you're seeing here, the sizes of the circles are the number of parameters they represent, so how many parameters they have. And it's an explosion. I mean, if you look at the left corner, you have GPT-1 with only 117 million parameters, and then you go to billion of parameters, and before you know it, we will exceed that as well. Like even GPT-4 has been undisclosed. They have not even mentioned how many parameters there are in there. What's also very interesting to see, there's a lot of Lambda-related models that have been released, and people are forking the data set, and they are creating their own Lambdas. You're starting to see these appear even on phones, or even in a web browser. There's a version where you can run it on the Chrome Canary, and it runs within the browser using the web GPU. In the browser, isolated, doesn't go to the internet. So you can actually have large language models on-premise without having any danger that your data, your privacy data, or your company secrets will actually get exposed. So this is really starting to disappear even on that level, is that we'll be just running it on a phone. This is already happening. You already have large language models running on an iPhone, running on an Android device. It's like, bloody hell. And this is just happening in the last 6 months. So just think about that. If we're now at the Commodore 64, who already did the Commodore 64, who've played with it or programmed on it, if this moment now is the Commodore 64, what's going to happen in 5 or 10 or 15 years? Because we are seeing an exponential growth in this ecosystem. And some people even say an exponential on an exponential. So it's mind-boggling. Another thing you need to know is that if they index the whole world, the whole internet, they scrape it, you actually create this really big beast. And it has biases, it is toxic, it's a monster, right? So you can't actually use it as such, because it's really unusable, it's just one big blob. What they actually do is that they do unsupervised learning, then do supervised fine-tuning, and then the cherry on the cake is the reinforcement learning from human feedback. And those are the different levels, and each level can actually produce a new model, which is more fine-tuned. And it's really those different steps that actually create this beauty of a ChatGPT, even that it's still not perfect. They still need to introduce guardrails and actually have some validations where it says like, okay, you're a friendly bot, you should not be abusive, you should be really polite, etc. But even then, there are people who are doing these prompt hacks where they are able to actually go outside of the guardrails and still do crazy things. But this is a bit of the process. So this is the techniques that they're using to make a really shiny large language model. So that's just a quick intro. As it was coronation last week, I thought it was applicable. This is a guy who I said, like, okay, create coronation images, but with McDonald's figures. It's like, bloody hell. Look how realistic it is. Even he has 5 fingers, etc. Right? It's unbelievable. So what are the Devoxx CFP use cases? Well, the first one for me, which was very, very helpful for Kim, who is one of the organizers we're working with Mark, is I actually wrote a small application where you could generate a tweet based on the talk, link to the talk that you were on. So you could just say, okay, generate the tweet, and then you could say, include the link to the talk, and I also want some emoticons or emojis. And it would just generate. And because I use a temperature, which I'll come back to later on, it's a way of saying if you want to be creative or if you want to be really always giving the same results. You could actually say, generate the tweet, and it will create a new one based on the context of the talk. So it will take in consideration the abstract of the talk. So Kim could just tweet and have really cool tweets without even knowing about the content of the talk, because it would just do it for you. So that was a quick win, just from a marketing perspective. I could even then include a Midjourney hook where I could also create an image based on the subject, but I didn't go that far. But totally possible. I think the most important one that was very, very useful as a conference organizer is the word embeddings and similar talks. So what I did is I actually used word embeddings, which is basically a vector representation of words. But the vectors have the meaning of the words. So it knows about if you're going to a bank, that a bank is then the building, another bank that you sit on. So it knows the context. So what I do is that I take the title and the description, I create a vector out of that, and then I find similar talks within all the 1,000 talks that we received. And the beauty is that you really get lots of nice other related talks that you would normally as a program chair not find because they didn't tag it correctly or they didn't put it in the same track. So this is really great. And this is also the same technique I'm using for the similarity talks. If you went to the Devoxx schedule, you saw the talk, and then you saw similar talks based on semantic meaning. Well, it's the same technique that was used there. Really, really interesting. And I actually didn't use any vector databases. I just used pandas. Well, it's all in Python, of course. So I've been doing lots of Python the last 6-7 months. So it's just a vector in memory, pandas, a pickle, which is like a serialized version of an object, and a pickle file, you just save it to disk, and that's it. So it's very straightforward, but it's really, really fast, and it doesn't cost me any licensing from the database perspective. And so what you need to think about these word embeddings is that it basically creates like this blob, this brain, so to speak, and you see all these different colors. The different colors, it will actually group the similar talks or similar content in these specific blobs. And this is rather important because it's really like a brain. And so what you're doing is that also when you're doing prompting, you will actually say, okay, you are a Hibernate expert. And so if you're a Hibernate expert and I ask you a question, you will activate that part of the brain which has the Hibernate expertise, right? And so this is giving the context. I'll come back to that one later on, but it's really important actually with not only ChatGPT, but with more the underlying APIs, that you can actually pinpoint and move it to a certain direction within the whole big corpus that has been indexed, right? So that's a rather important approach. And so when I do then give me similar talks, it will actually give me the similar talks and also the distance from where the original point is located within that space. So if it's closer to 0, if it's 0, it's the same talk, right? So that's basically how that works. And this is like 10 lines of Python code. So I'll show you that later on. It started with 100 lines of Python code, but now you have all these libraries, these frameworks, where you just work on a much higher abstraction layer, where it just becomes really, really simple. So another thing I'm starting to do, which I will activate for Devoxx Belgium next month, because our CFP opens next month, is keyword extraction. So if a speaker enters a talk, he or she can define tags. But now, because we have the abstract and the title, I can just generate the keywords for you. So the ones on the left are the ones that the user, the speaker, enters, and these are just generated by GPT. And so this is much nicer, because then again, if the speaker doesn't have to do too much work, just provide a title and an abstract. And by the way, a lot of speakers are using ChatGPT to create the title and abstract, so it's like, bloody hell. But it's happening. I mean, I actually did the same for my talk. I just let ChatGPT generate it. You can really automate quite a bit. Like one other thing I did for Belgium is that I took the transcripts from YouTube. So in YouTube, a lot of people don't know that, but YouTube actually produces a text, the transcript of what is said, and you can actually, with specific Python APIs, you can get that transcript. So you have this one big blob. And then I just use the large language model and say, okay, create a summary of this blob and create it in a way that it's a blog post. And that's what you see. So like for Devoxx Belgium, all the talks, and I'll do the same for Devoxx UK, you will just get under the talk and the video, you will get a summary of what has been actually said during that talk. Bloody, I mean, this was not possible a couple of years ago, right? I tell this to my wife, and she goes like, so what? She's not impressed. She goes like, can it do the dishes? Can it go after, wash the car? Can it go? No. So no, she's not interested. So it's like, okay, but honey, look, this was generated. They said, yeah, but what's this here? There's a typo. Okay, I'll come back to that one later on. I mean, it will not always understand all the words that the speaker is saying, or sometimes the transcript from YouTube is not always 100% correct either. But there's actually a fix for that, which I'll discuss. The other thing you can do is then once you have the context of the talk, you can do Q&A. So you can just post questions, which I've done here. And just like James Gosling spoke at Devoxx Belgium, so I said, like, what did James Gosling talk about? And based on that abstract, which is really long, it will actually come up with a sentence, say, yeah, that's what he talked. And then you can even say, well, give it in 3 keywords. What were the 3 keywords of his talk? And it will produce this. And I was playing with this in November, December, because Devoxx Belgium is in October, so my happy time is after the event when I can detox from Devoxx, right? And so I created this website, insights.devoxx.com, where I basically publish all of these experiments and people can play with it. So if you want to do some Q&A, you can have a look at that as well.
Stephan talks about the ecosystem of large language models and how they are trained by reinforcement learning from human feedback. He discusses how these are leveraged in the Call for Papers app, with multiple examples from generating tweets to making summaries of YouTube transcripts.
So this, if you don't know him, this is Antonio Gonzalez. He runs the Devoxx France events. And so what I actually did, not now because this is fake, but what I did at Devoxx France is that I was recording my voice and translating it. I was keeping a transcript of what I was saying during those 10 first minutes, creating a summary at ChatGPT, then sending that summary to a website where it produces a voice, but I had cloned his voice. So I was cloning his voice. He was in the room, right? And then I'm sending that audio to an avatar, which generates based on his image, his face basically talking and saying in his voice what I had said for the last 10 minutes. And he was in the room, and he was going like to his colleagues like, what the is he doing? It's like, so that's like, I mean, really crazy. And so I had his permission afterwards to do this. But the cool thing is just like, well, this is great. So you clone my voice. So he does a lot of online courses. And the longest time he spends is like recording his voice, saying what he had to, do in the course. And he had to transcribe it beforehand. So now he's going to actually use his cloned voice which will basically read the text, and he doesn't have to do this anymore, and it will always be with the right pronunciations because it's basically, an AI voice. It's like, wow, I didn't even think about that. That's like, wow, crazy. But scary as well, right? Because it's not 100% his voice, because a lot of his talks are in French, so it didn't work that well. But yeah, crazy time. So fake, fake avatars and so on. It's definitely going to happen, of course. It's already happened. I heard, actually, my wife told me this on the news. There was a lady, a mother, who got phoned by a guy, and he said, "I got your daughter. I need $1 million. Listen, here's your daughter." And she was speaking, "Mommy, please pay," and whatever. And they cloned the voice of the daughter. And it wasn't real. And she said, "No, I'm not paying." "Oh, $500,000 then." It's like, yeah, it was clear it was a scam, but it's like, bloody hell. So it is important that you know that this is all possible. Moving on. Email templates. The other thing I wanted to do, I have not yet done this, but it's like the thing I hate the most of the year is rejecting 900 talks, which are all great talks, and I have to reject them because we only have 200 slots. So normally we have like these default templates, which is very boring, and it's the same for everybody. So now, like here for Sven and Helen, for example, I can have two prompts. A prompt where if they get accepted, I just say to ChatGPT, "Hey, create an acceptance email based on the abstract," and then say why they got accepted, so to speak, right? But you need to do a bit of tweaking, but you can have a nice personal prompt for a speaker or speakers who get accepted or rejected. So that's totally possible. And this is an example of how it actually generates. You need to be, of course, very careful, and this is called hallucinations, that it doesn't come and all of a sudden says, "Yeah, you were selected because you were the best speaker, and we're going to cover everything, your travel and live." And so you need to watch out with this as well, right? So guardrails are again needed, but it's a fun thing to at least try. I think a disclaimer is really important. In the footer, you should definitely mention, "Hey, this was generated by ChatGPT, and be warned, it could hallucinate depending on how much Belgian beer it has drank." Right? So the other challenge I had was scheduling. Scheduling talks is a really important part of a conference, is to have the right flow, don't have duplicates and so on. And so what I had promised myself is that I would actually use Optaplanner. Optaplanner, it's now been rebranded to Timescale, exactly. Thank you, Tom. And so I was like, okay, I want to see if I can replace Optaplanner with ChatGPT. And I tweeted about this, and then Geoffrey, he's also from Belgium, and he's the founder of Optaplanner. He said immediately, if you find, and the wording is important, a feasible schedule for Devoxx BE with GPT by October, then he will dress up at Duke to welcome the Devoxx attendees in the entire week. So I went like, deal, let's do this. So I was extra motivated. And so after one day of hacking around, I came up with one, but it was a very basic solution. I was able to generate a full schedule for one day using 4 different rooms. And the first 2 digits are the track, and the last 4 digits are the talk ID. And so the constraints were that you couldn't have the same talks at the same time, which I can show you here. That's the case. That was the hardest part. And it was also taking in consideration the content of the talk. So it was actually looking at the semantic meaning and scheduling the talks based on the educational flow. So it was like, if it was a beginner's talk, it would schedule that one first, and if it would be an advanced talk, it would schedule that later. So we can now, and this is something even Optaplanner doesn't have, on the educational flow, on the meaning of the words, and then schedule it. That was like, wow. And even Geoffrey said like, wow, I need to include this in the next version of Timefold. But it wasn't the full Belgium, 5 days, 220 talks, 220 speakers, sorry, so I didn't succeed. So I didn't actually tweet this about, and I haven't written about it because I wanted to first do the talk and then surprise him, but I already gave Geoffrey a heads up. I did a different approach. So instead of creating and saying, create me this schedule, no, the best approach is this one. Create me an example Python app with these constraints. And this is, look, I get like goosebumps. It was able to do that. So this is the exact prompt that I gave, and I have multiple prompts. So it was like, okay, create me a Python app which creates the optimal schedule for a one-day event. I started with a one-day event, 4 rooms, talks, 50 minutes, blah, 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 and so on, so you can read it yourself. Then I gave it another prompt. Now add track names with 5 tracks. They must be spread evenly over, the talks must be spread evenly. Show the track names in the printout. Make sure that no talks with the same track are scheduled on the same time. Now add room capacity, because I need to have capacity as well of the rooms, because the more favorite talks should be in the bigger rooms. Yeah. So these are all constraints that we are using with OptaPlanner right now, right? So I'm constantly giving it, and then it's producing code, it's adding code, it's adding code, it's adding code, and this is basically what it produced. So this is my dummy test data. But this code, I don't even understand it. It's using some Google API. I could have said use OptaPlanner, but that's a Java version then. I wanted to have something different just to tease Geoffrey, of course. But you can basically see all the constraints I mentioned. It actually created the code, and I showed this to Geoffrey, and he said, okay, do you really want me to dress up as Duke the whole week? I said, no, it's fine. You don't have to. But I definitely want him to say, okay, Stephan, you won, right? I mean, it's a reputation thing, right? But yeah, so this is just the code going on, and this is what it produces, and it's correct. It's following the constraints that I've asked, and I could have continued. I stopped, of course, but I could have continued, and it's like, bloody hell! I mean, so like prompt engineering, the engineering word I hate, but it is really playing with the prompts. It really depends on how you approach it from the different angles that you can really come to a solution. And it's, yeah, crazy. So let's look at some code examples. Now, like I said, I do have to excuse me that I am using Python, but you will see it's very, very simple, very straightforward. So the first thing I wanted to show you is just the regular way of doing ChatGPT. And I'll show you a few other ones as well. But so basically, you need to install. Can everybody see this? Read this? Can't make it any bigger, but you basically install like OpenAI. You have the Python.dev to get the APIs. So you have keys, and this is it. This is the important line here. So I've created a method which is called call GPT, and I use the API, the OpenAPI library for completion, and then I basically say create this prompt using this model. So this is the GPT version 3. You could use version 4 as well. Then you have the prompt text, which is just the text, and then the maximum tokens you want as a response. So it's as simple as that. And with the prompt tokens, this is the context. So GPT-4 can go up to 8,000 tokens, between 4 and 8,000 tokens. And 8,000 tokens is basically the context, the data, the text that you can give, where it can play with that specific information, right? And so that's a really important thing, is that people think about, it's a question. No. You can give a full sentences of information, like the abstract, the title, and then it will use that information with the question that you ask on that information. So you know or you don't know, but ChatGPT stops till September 2021. So that's where it has the data, it's cut off at that time. So it doesn't know anything about the war of Ukraine, it doesn't know anything about the latest Devoxx, etc. But you can just feed it in with the context and give more information. So if I call my GPT method and I say Devoxx Belgium is a conference, because I'm using the complete, it will basically just try to complete my sentence. And this is not based on any facts. It will not go to the internet. It will not check. It will only have the information again till September. But it will do a best guess, right? And then I can say, like with the tweet, create me a tweet with the following info, and I'm basically giving it the title, the abstract, the speaker name, and then this call will create this tweet, as you've seen in the screenshot. Or say, okay, include the link to the talk, or include some emojis. So really, like 4 lines, 5 lines of code, very, very simple. So that's the normal way of doing it. Let's have a look at a bit more sophisticated one. So this example here, I was actually making a WordPress plugin in PHP for frequently asked questions. And so what I've done here is that I first say, you remember the blobs in the brains? I am saying here, you are a helpful conference organizer. Answer truthfully. If you don't know, then say, I don't know. And like that sentence is really key, because if you don't say that, it will start hallucinating and it will just freestyle. But if it doesn't, if you really say, if you don't know it, say don't know, it will actually stick to the facts. And the facts is the context. So this context here, this text is basically all the text on the frequently asked questions page of Devoxx Belgium. So I give all this text, and that's where this context size is really important, because it dictates how much you can give it, right? And then here I'm doing a chat completion, create. So this is the chat completion. This is a different approach than the previous one. And there I give it the role of the system is who am I? The other role of the system is the context. And then the user, that's the question. So here I can say, where is Devoxx organized? And it will perfectly, because it knows the context, it will say, it's in Antwerp. I can say, was there a Devoxx Hawaii organized? I'm not sure, because it doesn't know, it doesn't have any access, so we will try to not answer. And like here, which bus should I take? Well, it had that information from the context, so it can really say, well, it's bus 31, because it came from the frequently asked questions. So you can think about this just for anything in your own company or personal life or whatever, you just give it the context, right? Now, the problem is, of course, you only have 4,000 to 8,000 tokens. So what the technique is that you start using splitters. You start working with chunks. And that's something I'll show later on. Let me first go to slides. So it's this one here. So with YouTube, if you have a talk of like 1 hour, the transcript is bigger than the context that ChatGPT can support. So what the technique is for doing this is the following. So the first thing you do is that you try to create a transcript and download it from YouTube. Sometimes YouTube doesn't provide a transcript. So the other alternative is you can use Whisper. So Whisper from OpenAI, it's an open source tool. It runs on Mac and Linux and so on. And you basically give it an MP3, and it will create the text from the MP3 for you, right? And then what I'm also doing is that I'm getting the CFP def information from the speaker and the abstract and the bio. So if you are doing a Q&A, I can even give an answer of where the speaker is working, what or he has done, at what company, etc. And then the magic happens here, the processing phase. So this is the technique, and this is independent. This could be for PDFs, this could be for Word documents, this could be for WordPress, whatever. So you have some data, and it can be very, very big, can be even legal papers, right? So you have some data, text. What you do is that you use a splitter to create chunks of text, and the chunks shouldn't be bigger than the context that you're using or that the model supports. And then there's a few things you can do. You can create embeddings on these chunks. And that means that you have then a vector representation of the chunks, which it will actually know what the text is about. And once you have these embeddings, you can store them on disk, and then you can start doing Q&A or do whatever similarity things and so on. And this technique is what you're seeing. It's the same technique for all these type of questions and answers or search, etc. That's how they do it. Now, this is only because we have a limitation of 8K. There is a new version of ChatGPT which is going to 32K already. And there was a paper last month released where they went from 32K to 2 million. 2 million, a context of 2 million. You know what that means? You can give your whole project, whatever size it is, you give it your whole project, and it will be able to understand your whole project, and then you can say like, refactor my code. Where should I increase? Where should I, do some enhancements? Where could I make it faster, etc.? Your whole project. That's like, bloody hell, crazy stuff. So basically, if you then do a search, if you want to do a semantic search, the query is converted into, again, a vector representation of the question. You do a search, you find the chunks. Once you have the chunks, that text block where the answer is, you include that text block in the prompt, and then you ask the question. And because it already has all this information, and you could have multiple chunks, of course, right? It could have an answer in 2 different chunks of code, text, sorry. It will just then include those 2 text blocks in the prompt, and you can just ask the question. So let me show you that in action. But this is the most important technique. You just need to know that that's how they do it. So, didn't want to do that. Where's my code? Okay. So let's go to the YouTube one. That's maybe nicer. So I'm importing the different models. I'm doing the wrong one. Sorry about that. I'm not really used to the distraction thing. Here it is. That's better. So I'm importing quite a few different modules. The most important one is LangChain. If you remember only one thing, only one word, it's LangChain. Just remember that one. Lang from language and chain. This is a Python library which did not exist 6 months ago. So they started 6 months ago with this, and last month they got a $10 million investment of VCs. Right? This is, in my opinion, the Spring framework of Python for large language models. If you ever want to play with this, start learning LangChain. Every week they have a new version. It's growing rapidly. I mean, I'm already behind quite a bit. But it really creates it, and it's again an abstraction layer, but it makes it a lot simpler to play with all these things. So they have loaders for all sorts of data sources. So they have a loader for YouTube. So I just say YouTube loader, and this is my welcome talk from last year's Devoxx Belgium, so that's the idea. And I just say, load this YouTube talk, so it's basically getting the transcript from YouTube on this ID. Then I include a recursive character text splitter with a chunk of 2,000 characters. So it's creating chunks, it's splitting the transcript in chunks of 2,000. I've got 14 chunks of 2,000 from that transcript. And then I can create my word embeddings, which you can see at the top here. So I'm creating a word embedding instance, so I can do vectors of all the different chunk of blocks, of text blocks. I'm using a local vector store to store it into memory, but it's not really needed, but I wanted to play with this. You have 10 different vector databases these days. Many of them are open source. Many of them are getting large chunks of millions of dollars investments because they're seeing it as the new oracles, so to speak. And then I can do like something like this, where I say vector store, do a similarity search on this query. So I said like, how many tickets were sold? Because during my welcome, I said how many tickets there were sold. So I'm saying like, okay, do a similarity search. It found 4 blocks of text where I spoke about tickets. And these are the different blocks. So I'm just displaying them here. And then here, I'll do load Q&A chain. Let me remove the tooltip. So here, I'm doing a load Q&A chain with the large language model that I've initialized here using OpenAI. But the beauty is, it doesn't have to be OpenAI. It supports different large language models. So you have, like, for example, Wolfgram Alpha, which is specialized for mathematicians. So if you have a mathematician question, you can chain the different languages, the large language models. So if you have like a mathematician, a math question, it will first go, like, for example, to OpenAI, say, well, it doesn't know the answer. And then it will go to another large language model, say, oh yeah, this one knows about maths, and it will try to use that one to get the answer. So it does like this recursive, or it goes through a chain. And basically here, I just say chain run it with the search results and the query, and it actually found, 3,200 tickets were sold, which is the correct answer. Pretty neat, huh? And really, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket science to understand this, so it's really straightforward. And then here you can even see, like, in the different blocks where it actually has found answers. So it found the answer on the fourth document where the score is 100, so it knew, yeah, that's where the information is. Okay. Pretty neat. So LangChain, have a look at that. It's really promising. The cool thing is that they now also have a a JavaScript version. So I'm really, if I would have enough time, I mean, just a Java version would be so nice, right? But so what I'm doing now is that because it doesn't exist, what I'm doing is that I'm using, I create a web server like Flask in Python. So I basically create a web server in Python, which then talks to LangChain, and I use a REST interface from Java to actually use that the features. So that's the most pragmatic way of doing it. And it works pretty well. But it would be nice to have it in Java. But there are some issues. Hallucination, well, this guy definitely has an issue. But there are some other issues, like the one with the hallucination. So there was this talk at Devoxx Belgium, which is on Juke, the joy of SQL. Now, Juke, if I pronounce it right, but ChatGPT has no clue of that word. It doesn't know this word. It constantly thinks it's Juke with a D, Duke. Yeah? So it's basically creating the wrong, or Juke even, it's creating the wrong summaries. So what you can do is, what I did, is something which we are seeing now more and more, is reflection. So you create a first output, and then this output is changed with a new, you basically use the output as input for a new prompt. So you're chaining not large language models, you're chaining prompts. So what you can do is then say, well, hey, this is the output, and let me quickly go there. I've got it prepared on the playground. This is something you definitely should have a look at. This is on OpenAI, it's free. And the playground is actually a layer below ChatGPT. You can go a bit more in the settings. So here you can have like the temperature, which I talked about, the different models, the maximum length of response, etc. And there you can say like, hey, you're a genius in making summaries of technical presentations. So you're again already focusing on the different brain cells that it needs to activate. Then I give it the original title from the speaker. I give it a summary that it produced in the previous prompt. And then I actually say, rewrite a summary where the spelling mistakes are correct based on the original talk abstract. And it now rewrites its first summary, but now using the right spelling. And this is prompt engineering. I was already an engineer anyway, right? But this is like, wow. But it's playing with these techniques. It's really not, again, rocket science, but you need to know how to approach this. And the results are actually, it does a better job. So that's reflection. Another thing that you will notice if you run it in production is the problem of rate limit errors. So ChatGPT actually has, it's sometimes really overloaded. And you will actually get, if you ask you send a request, it will give this error. The server is currently overloaded, etc. So you need to have fallback strategies. And so the first thing you can do with the fallback is a very simple one, is basically have a loop. So this is in Python again, but you call the chat complete one, and you do it in a try block and in an infinite loop. And if there is an exception, you basically wait for like 1 second and you try again. And it's possible that after 2 seconds that it will actually respond to you, right? And of course, depending on how urgent it is, you can wait a bit longer. But that's the first technique already to actually circumvent or to actually have a solution where if you just think it will always respond, this will not happen. It will fail at certain moments because they're just overloaded. So this is one very trivial approach. The more sophisticated one, which I would highly recommend if you want to do this in production, like at a hospital or whatever, and you're really dependent on this, is have a fallback large language model. So what you can do is that you can go by default to ChatGPT first. If it fails, You can go, for example, to BART, because I think Google I/O is this week or today, so there's definitely going to be some announcements on that. But what you could also do is that you can use the Llama one, which runs locally on your Linux server or on your Mac. So it doesn't even, it will always respond because it's just locally installed. So if it fails, you basically fall back to another model and you will get an answer, maybe not as good as ChatGPT, but it will still have at least the functionality in place. So this is really a great technique, and we're starting to see that as a good working practice. So looking 11 minutes. Another thing, who has already heard about GPT plugins? Only a few, so I should talk about this. So what is happening, and this is in private beta, I don't have access to it, but they are now extending ChatGPT with plugins. And the plugins is basically a way of documenting your REST interface. So it's a bit hard to read, but I've actually done this for Devoxx Insights, where it's basically a YAML file that you write explaining your REST. It's like Swagger, but for ChatGPT. So you're explaining it in human sentences. That's really important. You need to give it a human description so it can understand. I mean, the language is becoming the API, right? So you're explaining it in a human language what this REST interface does. And so if I would have a question in ChatGPT about books on Java, and I have the Devoxx plugin activated, it will know, this is a question on books. I have the Devoxx plugin. I know where the REST interface is. So I will call this REST interface based on this schema. And you can actually document the whole schema. I'll skip to that one, but this one is more important, where it actually gives you, the parameters of the REST interface, etc. And this is becoming actually obsolete because it's starting to become smart enough to just look at the REST endpoint and it knows what it needs to do if you have it well documented. And it will basically call that method for you in ChatGPT, asking that question. So it's breaking out of this walled garden, and it can actually reach out and do real-time searches, etc., to the internet. And again, I will skip this one, but I've got an example in LangChain where LangChain supports plugins. So I can already write my plugins without having access to ChatGPT because they already support it in an open source manner. So that's pretty cool. I can basically prepare my projects to be compliant once it's public available. So in conclusion, and I still got a few demos, so that's why I want to move on. There's definitely a large language revolution going on. I think it's developers versus developers who are using GPT. I mean, I can tell you, I work at home. I'm just one person at home, right? I use GPT on a daily basis. I use it as my pair developer. So if I check in my code, I will actually give the code and actually say, okay, how can I improve this? How could I make it better? How can I make it readable, more readable? And it will actually give me suggestions. And not always it will be good, but it's really doing me it's like a sanity check. And it works really well. And I think as a result, I'm being more productive, for sure. I'm definitely creating better quality code. I'm not an expert developer, I'm just an average developer, but it's turning me into an expert developer, for sure. Because I'm learning from it by just giving the feedback it's giving me and the reviews it does on my code. It's really crazy. So it's developers versus developers who are using this, for sure. I'm 100% convinced about that. It increases my productivity. I can pledge for that. It will lead to more qualitative software, because again, you have like this brain who's basically guiding you if you use the right prompts. And the cost of custom code goes down as well, because a lot of custom code can really be generated. I can really remember the context. I can give it my domain. I can give it my repository, my controller and service, and then I can say, okay, create my integration test or create whatever. But as long as you give that context, that's really important. A lot of developers, they just think like, it's magic, so I'll just ask a question. That's not enough. You need to give it the context. You need to give it part of your code, and if it has that information, it will do a really great job. And so, yeah, the exponential growth is like, it's going so fast that it's really scary. So let me quickly go to another website before I run out, which is this one here. I've actually discovered that at Devoxx Greece last week, which is called find.com. And so find.com, write this down. This is the second thing you need to remember. So it's LangChain and find with PHIND.com. And what you can do there, it's free for the moment. It will change, of course, but it's like a ChatGPT clone for developers. And so what you can do is you can ask a question like, show me how to set up Firebase with an emulator using Spring Boot, because that's what I'm doing these days. You can give it extra context where you can give code, and then you can say, use the best model, and it will give an answer. But the beauty is, once it gives the answer, it will immediately show you all the sources that it's using, where the answer is coming from, and you can do follow-up questions on and on and on and on. So you can say, ask a follow-up question, and it will continue based on the context that you're in. So you're like in the zone when you're doing some development, but you're not alone. You're in the zone with this beast, which will help you in unbelievable ways, and it will even link you to all the sites where it's getting the information from. So use this, seriously, use it. Who knew about this? Apart from you? Only 3 people, right? So I think that just coming to this talk, knowing about this tool, I think that's already worth your visit here for sure. So I wanted to really share that because it's a really important website. It's probably, eventually they're going to turn on the pricing for sure, of course. But so I'm also on Reddit and so on, and you get all these different people's emotions, and it's different emotional feedbacks, like, no, my work is banning it, okay? My country is banning it. Well, that they roll back that thing. But you see, people are really using it in a very constructive way as well. But it's a dual feeling, right? It is both with excitement and fear. Because just think about, if this 2 million contexts will eventually happen, what impact will it have on us? I see on like Reddit, there's like 18-year-olds saying like, okay, I'm thinking of doing computer science, but is there still a future in it? So younger people are like, what's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years? Or we don't know, to be honest, right? But then there's other people, like I saw this tweet yesterday from a person I don't know, but he says like, I'm a technical, and you can read it. And he said like, my sister wasn't technical since 6 months ago, but now she is totally enabled using ChatGPT. So if you know how to prompt it and ask the right questions, you can produce some hello world applications. It's still hello world, right? And it's very dangerous as well as a junior, because if you just copy and paste what it produces and it hallucinates, you have no clue what it's doing. But if you're a senior developer and you know what you're doing, it really is a 1 + 1 is 3 type of definition. And jobs will disappear. It's already happening, right? I actually asked ChatGPT for which jobs would disappear, and even like, what would be the human threat replacements? Customer service, content writers, translators. I mean, I just did real-time translation from English to French using ChatGPT. I'm already doing it. So there's definitely, I think we will have to reposition ourselves, but I do think that the end result will still be a net positive. I'm an optimistic person, and I do hope that it will. I mean, it would be great if it replaces the politicians. I think that's going to be just a better world. But yeah, we'll see. So these are the links on the different code examples. If you want to know this, just take a picture of that. The GPT scheduler one is the LinkedIn post I did, but also the code from the second version. And if you want to do live translations, you can go to my GitHub account and just use the transcript service. So make sure you have that link. Those are the power tools. So you have find.com. But if you don't want to pay $10 for GitHub Copilot, there's a free version, an alternative, which is called Codium.com. I discovered that at Devoxx Greece last week. And Codium.com is a plugin for IntelliJ, Visual Code, etc. And for the moment, it's free. You don't have to pay for it. And it does the exact same thing like Copilot. What I'm looking forward to is Copilot X, because what Copilot X does is it includes ChatGPT within your development environment. So you can highlight code, and it already knows the context because you're in your Java file or Python file or whatever. You highlight the method, and then you say in the chat, okay, create a unit test or create an integration test. And because it already has the context, it already knows that, okay, it's a Java project, so I have to be a Java specialist, it will produce that code for you. So I'm really looking forward to the Copilot X thing. And that's it. I would say thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'll be around. I'll be here tomorrow as well, where I'll do an Ignite talk completely generated with ChatGPT and some other technologies. And I would say see you tomorrow. Thank you.